What are some of the biggest highlights that are being introduced right now with ITIL4?
Well, honestly, this whole idea of OCM, it goes really well with what ITIL was looking to evolve into as part of the latest. Because with the idea of OCM, we want to be able to plan things out, be as transparent as possible, and communicate as often, create a higher level roadmap that everyone can buy into, provide training so that people are encouraged to participate, and then from there start measuring it and making sure that everyone is a champion of it. So in the ITIL world, they actually have 7 overall guiding principles that kind of focus on those very items. It's just flushed out in a different method. So they took what we had previously, which a lot of people were taking as a prescription. You know, I want to be a cookie cutter ITIL compliant, which a lot of us were having challenges in figuring out how to fit into, and rolling it back up to understanding what is the overall vision that we're trying to achieve here. And that was basically making sure that we are focused on our customers as well as establishing value. So in order for you to do that, you have to understand what is the intended value of what we are doing for our customers. What are the day-to-day activities that we're doing to help us to achieve that value? So when you start thinking of it that way, then you got to roll back all the activities that you do and kind of look at them holistically. At a higher level. So what ITIL4 started to introduce was the concept of a service value system and a service value chain that explores all of the components together at once and how they work together to create your value creation. So that idea of individual processes, I'm just incident, I'm just problem, I'm just change. You were shifting away from that into an overall practice so that you have a wider context of customer experiences, how it is you're defining evolving value, all the digital transformations that you have to consider, plus all of the different ways that we work. Because there have been a lot of progress in other ways of thinking, things like agile, lean, DevOps. Those are all pretty well established at this point as methods for us to organize our development efforts. How do we apply that now in the grander ITSM world? So those are some of the key things that we started to see changed as part of the latest version of ITIL.
Great. And you've mentioned this a little bit, but with the shift to practices, how does that impact the typical roles that people play in IT? So we're seeing this shift transpire. Let's say the company's starting to adapt to ITIL4. How does that impact the roles on a day-to-day basis?
It can get a little tricky, right? Because a lot of us, we still think in our silos. I am the incident process manager. I'm part of the change advisory board. Now, the idea is for you to be part of this overall value chain. So you have to have an appreciation for every one of the activities that happen and think of it as just kind of a bigger picture that helps to establish that value. So wherever possible, you should be looking to provide your thoughts on how you can plan things out, improve, engage, design them, going and obtaining new technologies or building them out, and then delivering all the different services that we have across the different processes into a practice, not just the one piece that you do. So we kind of all have to wear all these different hats and provide our feedback. Way back when I was a process manager, that was actually one of the first things I wanted to do was figure out how do I improve my peers and their processes so that it can, then in turn can help how we improve the adoption of mine. I always called it the idea of the process advisory board. That's kind of now part of the staple here of what we do in ITIL. So you can think of all those activities kind of like seasonings that you have in your cupboard. You don't always apply all the different seasonings, but you should definitely be aware of them because whatever recipe comes up, you'll have to figure out how to apply them. And it changes over time, right? Because as you can imagine, everyone has different tastes. Tastes change over time. So when we start to transition that to the business world, it's the value or the perceived value evolves. So it forces all of us to continually look to improve, to innovate how we approach our work.
Great. And what would you say is the biggest challenge right now as companies start to adapt ITIL4?
Well, the whole idea of how you define your service, and then the value that it brings can be quite challenging, because you're trying to figure out, what am I going to be in business for? And then the moment people start using that service, what do I got to do to continually improve it? And so that definition of value changes. And so you have to start thinking about shifting that definition between not just you, but also your customers. They have to tell you what is it that they're looking for in your service offerings. For products, it might be a little easier because it's kind of just monodirectional. I want the product to do this, or I want the widget to do that. But when we start looking at services, we are participants there as the people who are fulfilling the service and the people who are consuming the service. Both need to have a mechanism for feedback. And then from there, we have to monitor it. We have to stay engaged so that we can then gather new requirements and then adjust the definition of value. So that's a big shift for most people. It's not just me delivering a service, it's how you are leveraging it and how we work together to make sure you achieve the outcome you're trying to have.
It's an all-inclusive model, right? It's collaborative. That a lot of folks in IT these days are very collaborative, right? That's something that's been trending for many years now. Really working together and getting everybody together. And like you said, some folks are are in charge of just the delivery of the hardware, for example, and they're just like, well, what do you need from me? Okay, here you go, done, right? I'm the front end interface GUI person. I'm going to go ahead and design this thing for you. Here you go. I'm done. What I'm hearing right now, Mario, is that it's not going to be that siloed with ITIL4. It isn't actually. It's more of an inclusive model where everybody needs to understand upfront the value that's going to eventually be provided to the end user, whether it's internal customer, whether it's external customer. Understanding that and then having that strategy, right, designed properly where you're going to execute against it, and then eventually it goes live, right? It goes operational, and then you continue to monitor that to make those changes, which I think everybody understands that's CSI, right? But again, if at the end of the day, it's really having a team that's going to collaborate and work on this together, and remove that mentality of silo thinking, right?
Right. So which is why the OCM approach, making sure change management they come together.
Exactly. So now, hopefully that's painting that picture where OCM is a component of this, and it goes hand in hand. If you start that up front and start identifying what that strategy is going to be, what the value, like Mario mentioned, the value system, that value chain, you identify that up front, and people are going to start, the hope is that they start, being inclusive and excited about what they're doing, because they're going to provide value, not just what they're good at, but they're going to learn from others, and they're going to provide value to each one of their team members as it goes through the chain. And at the end of the day, it's that end product, right? Which that product could be an application, for example, mobile app. And at the end of the day, it's great value for the company, and you're part of that team that created that.
For sure.
Great.
So one thing I wanted to add, and this goes for both our organizations, we don't look at any of our work efforts as just a single transaction. You asked us to do something, we gave you what you asked for, we're done. No, you have to think of every one of your opportunities as a joint partnership, where you want to start to learn about how the services or the values that others have, and how you can help to continually improve that. Because a lot of the time, yes, you're coming in to learn about ServiceNow, or I want to teach you ITIL4. But that's all, part of a bigger picture where you're spending 75-80% of your time on understanding the organization, getting invested in their efforts, and helping to change their culture. So it's not just a single transaction. You are in there to try to help them improve. And so for anyone that's part of IT, they can't look at themselves as a different body from business. For most of us, IT is the business now.
Right.
Well, I think we've heard it a lot from different, organizations and leaders is that every company is now an IT company, right? And I think that it's more and more truthful, and it's interesting to see. But also with this, if every company is an IT company, to me that means every company needs, OCM and needs this adaptation to ITIL4 and all these other great methodologies, and they need to be able to implement it on a scale that allows for scalability. What a play on words, but seems that that's where we're progressing towards right now. I mean, this is the digital age. What would you say ITIL4, what is it solving? I mean, obviously it's bringing people together, it's collaboration. But was that the intention behind ITIL4? Is that what they wanted to solve? Or what was the reasoning and rationale to bringing this platform to fruition?
Well, so with ITIL, I'd say from the first couple of versions, for V2, V3, there was a lot of granular definitions. I want to know how it is that I deal with a break fix situation. How is it that I should be managing the changes in my environment? And that was great because it helped IT to structure themselves more like a business, so that we're all speaking the same language and you know who you work with. But then that started to create that idea of the silos. And then, people did not feel invested. I'm, oh, you're calling me for a change. Well, I only deal with incidents. I'm going to have to pass you on to someone else. So now they are trying to bring things back. And the reality is there's a lot of other great practices, industry standards that have come, and you don't want to ignore those. You want to learn from those and adopt them as well. That's why there's a lot of reference to changes with Agile, with DevOps, what's happened in the PMI world. They've also gone with an Agile approach. So ITIL is kind of bringing all those new concepts together into one, rather than trying to figure out how to manage them on their own. Let's just take lessons learned right across all industries and apply it together.
Okay. And like you mentioned, it can incorporate everything from Agile. Is waterfall still being incorporated at this point? Has everyone pushed waterfall to the wayside? That's not even discussed any longer. It's just Agile.
Well, Arnold can definitely speak to this,
Okay.
with all the active implementations.
Waterfall, I don't know, what do you want to call it?
Yeah,
whatever you want. Everybody gravitates toward waterfall. It's just, I think it's like human nature, right? To say, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then, yeah. Again, it goes back to the organization, the culture, how they're adapting change, and how they're actually currently managing their projects, their transformation. Sometimes we see where there's a hybrid approach. Sometimes we see that where there's many different methodologies being used. So again, we need to understand that up front. Is waterfall still being used? Yeah, you'll see it out there, and even justly so. It's not like a huge bad word. It just depends on the engagement and how you're going to execute against the plan. Many times waterfall works perfectly, and that's what's needed for that particular engagement. However, we see a lot of Agile, Scrum as well, depending on what we're developing. Custom apps, for example, require more of a Scrum Agile methodology where we're kind of running fast. Yeah, so I mean, to answer your question, it's still there. It just depends on how you're using it, but it's not used very, very often anymore. I mean, at least we don't go. That's not our go-to.
And
it's not standalone. It's combined.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we have about 5 more minutes before I want to do that. Well, a little less now, but before we open it up to questions. So before we go to questions, I wanted to toss it over, first of all, Arnold and Mario, thank you so much again. But is there anything else you wanted to share about any of the topics that we discussed that maybe we didn't get to jump into? So either OCM, ITIL4, anything that we weren't able to exactly touch. You good right now? All right, great.
Well, real quick, I think we touched on some good stuff, but I'm excited to take the conversation further, not on this session, but into OCM, ITIL V4, and into predictive intelligence, your AI world, and how that all kind of meshes together, because it's all there, right? That's a very exciting conversation. I think that's what the next one may be.
Well, since you just jumped in there, hold on, we've got a few minutes. So how would you define it? Let's at least dive into it a little bit. That's a great teaser. AI, everybody wants to know what's going on with AI, machine learning.
What isn't, right?
ITIL4, before help, where does that start? I guess it does start there, but what is the correlation?
Yeah, it's the flavor of the month, right? Everybody's talking about it. Well, again, it's that approach, you know, from our standpoint, how we're looking at this, right? With ITIL4, and like we discussed, you're breaking down those silos, and you're ensuring that everyone is collaborating and everybody sharing that data and that information. With predictive intelligence, again, the core root of it is understanding everything that's happening, making those predictive decisions with algorithms, obviously. But in order for you to understand all those moving parts, that data needs to be there. Those experiences have to be there already to some degree, right? You're always going to refine them. But again, if you look at that model of saying, you know, AI is going to make sure that or ensure that it's touching all of the areas that it needs to, it's all inclusive to make the correct decision, to move things forward. It goes hand in hand with that strategy and the, you know, the value system Mario commented on before, where you're breaking those silos down and everybody's sharing data in order to succeed, right? So again, AI is just really an extension of, you know, from my perspective, just doing it with, you know.
Looking at things from a training perspective, I mean, if you don't factor in how people are going to be using technology, then that old saying, garbage in, garbage out, it still applies. You're going to have the predictive intelligence come up with, you know, false directions because you haven't learned how to apply it in your day-to-day. So it's one thing to figure out how to adopt the AI, and there's a lot of brilliant minds that are trying to figure out the technology, the development, the programming behind that. But then from there, how you are going to use that, and then you start making your adjustments. Because, I mean, looking at things manually back in the day, I would have to make monthly reports on how things were going in my incident, problem, and change processes. And so I was just manually consuming the info that ServiceNow was giving me and providing my ideas to my stakeholders. And sometimes I would literally see the same exact numbers where we need to improve the same exact thing from one month over to the next. So you have to help people be educated and how to apply what to change. Otherwise, your predictive intelligence is just going to be the same thing over and over again. You're not changing and improving how it is that you do your day-to-day.
Great point.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad we did get to dive into that a little. So thank you, Arnold, for bringing up the AI.
Sure.
It's such a great topic right now. I do want to open it up to our participants right now. As I tossed in the chat, if you do have questions, right now is a great opportunity. Just go ahead and list your questions in the chat box, and we'll be sure to get those answered. If for whatever reason you have questions that arise later, we will follow up. I know it's already been requested, but we have recorded this entire session, and we will send it out to all their participants and everyone that was registered. So you will have access to this. You can re-listen, and then also we'll have contact information provided, and we'll make sure that we get all the questions, you know, following up answered as well. So no worries there. So just looking right now, it doesn't look like we have many questions. So we'll probably just, again, toss it back to our two panelists. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I know I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did as well. It was great learning a lot more about ITIL4, OCM, and also just, you know, how MavenNext and RiverHorse have both adapted to this very changing landscape. And it sounds like you're both doing very well, and so far as helping others along the way during these changing times.
We're certainly enjoying the journey, not just from a company perspective internally, but with our clients, with our partners. Again, it's embracing it, having fun doing it. The rest comes naturally, right? So yeah, good.
Well, Arnold, thank you so much. Mario, thank you so much. And right now, we will be back again next month with another Tech Talk, so do stay tuned. I'll follow up with all of our attendees and participants with the recording. And thanks for joining Tech Talks with Arnold and Mario.